Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I am very happy to host this talk by KIRSTEN DEMELO, who will be leading our live with the theme Obedience and Resignation. Hi, KIRSTEN. How are you doing?
Hey, good morning, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Good. So before we get to KIRSTEN, I have two announcements. First, our Initiation into Spiritism course is now complete and available on our YouTube channel. This course is meant for those who want to learn about Spiritism or review its basic principles. Take advantage of this amazing work, and please stay tuned for future announcements about our follow-up course. Also, on the screen, please note there is a QR code. If you want to help the USSF produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, please scan the QR code on screen for your donation. Now, back to KIRSTEN. Together with everyone who is watching this live broadcast, I want to give you a very warm welcome. So good to have you here to discuss obedience and resignation. Before she begins to enlighten us over the next hour, please allow me to formally introduce her. KIRSTEN DEMELO is an active member at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore. She was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Spiritist parents and was part of the Spiritist Society of Philadelphia before moving to Maryland in 2011. She has participated in the Spiritist Medical Congress and multiple Spiritist symposiums here in the USA. Professionally, she is a registered nurse. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree with experience in critical care, case management, and utilization management. Also, let me take this opportunity to let you all know that your questions, you can submit your questions during the presentation using the chat window. KIRSTEN has reserved time at the end to address your comments and questions after she concludes her presentation. All right, KIRSTEN, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just get situated with my slides here. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes.
Can you see my slides? You can see my slides. Okay, great. Just making sure. I just switched screens. You know, with technology, we just want to be extra careful. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to be in the presence of such dear friends, and a huge responsibility to be here talking about this topic. We feel the weight of the responsibility in a sense, but also we wanted to share that this isn't a talk or a talk that is here to bore you, hopefully. It's one that truly comes from the depths of our soul. It's a topic that touches every life on this earth. And the reason for that is that who doesn't suffer? Who hasn't had a bad experience or a rough few years? For most of the planet, the last few years have been really hard. And maybe that's still going on for a lot of us, or some of you. Maybe you just overcame or are still going through. You could have just received the news, diagnostic results that were not what you expected from your doctor or healthcare provider. Or maybe you heard of a loved one getting diagnosed with something and you just weren't prepared. Or it could even be a child, someone that you love. It could be your own child or a nephew or a niece or just someone whom you care deeply for. It is in those moments where our strength is tested. It is in those few seconds, those few moments when we first come to know of something that we didn't plan for, we didn't think would happen, that calls to us to make a decision, whether we know it consciously or unconsciously, and whether we know that we're making this decision voluntarily or involuntarily. In those moments, those critical moments where we choose to be angry, or we choose to accept. Now let's take a moment here to acknowledge something, that it's important that we be authentic, we be honest with ourselves about our feelings, because pushing things down and acting as if things are okay or that you accept things, but really deep down you do not, also is not beneficial and helpful. So first and foremost, being authentic with how you feel, allowing yourself to feel and acknowledge your feelings, and also realizing that it's an opportunity. Now, all of this doesn't necessarily happen in that moment when you get or come to know of or go through a difficult situation. Sometimes it's sometime after that, after the initial shock has worn off. Sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's a few days, it could be even longer than that, depending upon the situation. We all have our own journey to travel with this. But today we wanted to share with you this real gem, this this gem that you can keep with you wherever you go. A lot of people, and I remember when I first was going into nursing school over a decade ago, and getting really excited and going to the store, because at that time I think the internet wasn't super big. Amazon wasn't what it is today, so I actually went to a store because I wanted to have some emergency things in my car. I wanted to have it was this face mask, in case if I was ever out and I needed to perform CPR, I wanted to have that on my person at all times. And I remember being so joyous about that, and just having other, like an emergency kit in my car, because I had to drive quite a ways to school and to work. So I was just excited to be able to be of use at all. So, and we think about that now, and I had that CPR mask for so long, and no longer have it. But I think about that. And I think about that in terms of our own spirituality. What are we carrying with us when the need arises, when something happens and we can pull it out of ourselves, so to speak, and use it in that moment? Many people don't prepare for emergencies. They don't have an emergency kit in the car. I remember when I got my first car, and my father said to me, make sure you always have a blanket in the car. You never know, winters can be cold, if something were to happen, always keep a bottle of water in your car. Things of that nature, and I think I was 19 at the time. And with that, I always thought about, being prepared. And even Joanna DeAngelis tells us in Happy Life to contemplate death. Not that it's morbid, because when we say, let's think about death every day, we think that maybe that's morbid, but it's not. But let us be prepared as much as we can for what may lie ahead. But the truth is that most of us are not prepared. The truth is that probably the average person is not prepared for any emergency, or very little at that, let alone when it comes to dealing with struggles, challenges that can really just knock the wind out of our sails, so to speak, or when the rug just gets pulled out from underneath us. That is the time, it's the moment of truth, as they say, right? But this is not an opportunity for us to be harsh or judgmental of ourselves or others. This is just a moment we want to share that this is a gem to carry with you. Obedience and resignation. That through all things in our lives, no matter what it is, no matter what we are enduring, there are certain things that we cannot change, that is just not in our power to change. Those tend to be the external things. Much like that prayer of serenity, God grant me the serenity to know, what I can change and what I cannot. And to know that what we most have power over are our own thoughts, our feelings, and how we react, how we manage our own acceptance or lack thereof of the situation. Many of us know the definition of obedience. We've heard it, we've seen it in movies, we've heard it in churches and in different religions, and it's probably got a bad rep, with a lot of certain people in certain religious areas that probably have abused power and whatnot. But for right now, let's just define what obedience is. It's an instance of obeying. And what is to obey? It's to follow command or guidance, to conform or to comply. And what is resignation? Most of us know what resignation is: to resign oneself, to surrender, or even submissiveness. And all of these words can have such a negative connotation to them. I don't want to submit to anyone. I'm strong. I'm a boss. And that's when our ego comes in and really doesn't help us, because we need to take a step back and understand and reframe our understanding of obedience and resignation. It is not, we are not slaves. That's not what in the gospel according to Spiritism, what they teach us about. It's not what we believe that God, Jesus, our guardian angels, the good spirits want us to take away from these words. But something much more profound. It is a deep and inner movement that happens. And it is only something that an individual can experience and go through. Because pain, we will all go through pain. Most of you who are watching this, or who maybe not even watching this, live, could be watching at a later time, have gone through something. And if you haven't, chances are that you will, because it's just the nature of how things are. It's how we learn. Pain is the greatest teacher. Second to the power of God, pain has a great power. And that's a teaching that comes out of the book Action and Reaction by the spirit Andrea Louise, psychographed by Chico Xavier. So pain's a great teacher. And if we open up our heart to learn, we will have a lot to learn from that. And so brings us to this story, and you can read about this true story. You can Google it online. Mademoiselle Emma, otherwise known as Emma Levry. This is also an excerpt from the book Heaven and Hell. But she was an actual person. She lived in 1842, and she in Europe, and she was the protege of Madame Taglioni. She was a ballerina and very well known in her time, but she was young. She was 21 years of age, and a terrible thing happened while she was practicing on stage. Her outfit that they wore at that time, her tutu, that was made of tulle, it caught fire from on stage from a lamp from gasoline. Just completely freak accident that happened. So it caught fire. She had all these burns while she was rehearsing, and she didn't die right away. She actually lived for about 8 more months and died from an infection. Of course, at that time in the 1800s, medical science wasn't as it is progressed as it is today when in treating burns. We were so much more advanced. And one of the most common ways that people died at that time from burns was infection. So infection did set in, and she died in an excruciating way for those 8 months. We know that in Heaven and Hell, they detail that she suffered a great deal those 8 months. But it was really interesting because soon after and these are just some photos of her, actual photos that you can find online. And in Paris, they still have her actual tutu, her burnt tutu. It's in a sarcophagus in Paris where they keep it for historical purposes. But what was really interesting was after she passed, there were some members, excuse me, at the Parisian Spiritist Society that knew of her and were thinking of invoking her. And then she came spontaneously and shared that indeed she did suffer tremendous amount. But even though she didn't have any understanding of Spiritism or life after death, as a matter of fact, she was a Catholic and a devout Catholic. And she explained, she explained that in those moments where they were most excruciating and most painful, she felt as a Catholic that it was better to be burning in the physical realm than in purgatory or in hell, and that if she were just faithful to God, that she would be well after she passed. So she said that she immediately submitted and resigned herself to accept what was happening to her. And she gave spontaneous communication in the following way. And we could see, as she was marked as one of the happy spirits, that even through this excruciating thing that happened to her, she was already very wise for a 21-year-old and a wise spirit as well. And she said the following: those who suffer while on earth receive recompense in the other life. Be resigned if you are stricken. Bow down before the supreme goodness of the omnipotent God whenever he gives you a heavy burden to bear. If he calls you after great suffering, and if there is no complaining or moaning in your heart, you will perceive the recompense that God has reserved for you. You will see in the other life, the happy life, how the little pain and suffering of earth are. Always worship God. Love him with all your heart. Pray to him above all. Pray to him confidently. He who is your support while on earth, your hope and your salvation. Excuse me. Truly a moving message from someone who endured tremendous physical pain, but she was at the height of her career. 21-year-old, highly talented, already very well known. You can even say quasi famous enough for in Paris they have kept her tutu, so she was of importance. But she was knocked down at the prime of her life, 21 years old, when her life was just starting. And she could have had every reason to complain and to say, my God, I'm 21 years old. Why is this happening to me? And no one would have blamed her for questioning that because it makes sense. But she made the decision early on to resign herself to accept the will of God. What was happening to her, she couldn't change it. What she could change, she realized, was her own emotions, how she reacted to this terrible accident, quote unquote. Nothing happens by chance. We don't know the backstory. It wasn't shared in Heaven and Hell, but nothing happens by chance. It's so much easier when we stop fighting against the current. This is the key. This is the gem in obedience and resignation. Because when we do the opposite, when we rebel and get upset and get angry for an extended period of time, because there's always the initial reaction, and then you can remedy it. But when we continue on and on to rebel and fight against what is, we suffer more. Our pain is more painful. It's almost as if we double our pain and suffering by not accepting it. But when we choose to accept, to find acceptance, it is like the most soothing, calming balm or experience you can ever have. It is a peace that can come over you that is almost superhuman in a sense. And the interesting thing about it all is that in accepting that which we cannot change, it helps us to be more connected with the divine and feel even more invigorated because we get in touch with the self, with our purpose, with our true being as children of God. And in the Spiritist understanding of obedience and resignation, the gospel tells us that obedience, we can think of it as the consent of our reason. We understand. And resignation is the consent of the heart. It is not God wanting us to submit to his harsh reign. Quite the opposite. There are lessons that we can learn if we take advantage. Pain is here to teach us. If we can be open, if we can flip the script, if we can learn to reframe what is happening to us, we will be able to experience so much more peace and actually learn the lessons that we need to learn. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into this passage in chapter 9, item 8 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. There's a message from Lazaire. We're only bringing a very small portion of the message. You can read it in its entirety in this chapter in the Gospel. And it's short, made shorter by me just bringing a small excerpt, but it can easily be overlooked. We can read it. It sounds very poetic. And we read words in the gospel and they sound amazing. And oh, that sounds so beautiful. Like listening to an orchestra play a beautiful harmony. But it's more than just listening. We can't just hear it. We have to take it in, understand it, digest it. And much like when I would carry around that CPR mask, carry it with us. When we need to utilize it and draw strength from it. The gospel says, at all points, Jesus' doctrine teaches obedience and resignation, two very active companion virtues of meekness. And if you don't know what it is to be meek, just as a reminder, because it's such an important virtue to have, to experience, to be, is to be humble in spirit or manner, submissive or compliant, but not in a negative way. But to not be rebellious. And we learn in a similar chapter about meekness and affability. In layman's terms, it's just being loving your neighbor, being kind to others, smiling, which, by the way, doesn't come natural to everyone. Contrary to popular belief, not everyone carries within them the sunshine. Sometimes we bring from many lifetimes or from our upbringing or what have you. But it's okay because we can learn to be different. And the gospel continues on. Although people erroneously confuse them with the negation of sentiment and will. People think being obedient and resigning is giving up and having no feeling. And that's not at all what it is. It's quite the contrary. It's giving yourself permission to feel authentically what you're going through and to know that it's not about my will, but it's about God's will, and trusting in the greater design that perhaps I don't understand. Perhaps I don't remember what I had agreed to prior to reincarnating, and that's okay. But as the saying goes, letting go and let God. It's a powerful tools. And as we shared, obedience is the consent of reason. Resignation is the consent of the heart. So we need both our reason and our heart. We need to both understand our emotions, but also use common sense and reasoning to get through. The gospel goes on to say both are active forces because they carry the burden of the trials that insensate rebellion lets drop. The coward cannot be resigned, just as the proud and the selfish person cannot be obedient. Jesus was the incarnation of these virtues, scorned by materialistic antiquity. These are gems to remember. If we are proud and selfish, we cannot stand in obedience. And if we are cowardice, if we don't want to face what is staring us right in the face, we cannot be resigned. So it is in facing ourselves authentically that we can begin this process. And we can bring in medical science and neuroscience. There's so much science behind the brain and meditation and how much, our thoughts have power and can affect our emotions. And there's that famous saying that neurons that fire together wire together. And this is a quote from Deepak Chopra, who wasn't the one to be the one to coin that phrase, by the way. It was another neuroscientist in the 1940s, Dr. Hebarian. But this quote comes from Deepak Chopra, where he's quoting this other neuroscientist: neurons that fire together wire together. You can rewire your brain for higher consciousness by focusing on love. So we have power over how we choose to experience life. That is our greatest superpower. We have that power within us. And so many of us are faced with that, faced with the choice. And there's a famous, semi-famous story that actually happened in around 2016, 2017, I believe. And it was this famous person, Sheryl Sandberg, and her husband, who perhaps was sort of well known, kind of in the field of technology and things of that nature. And Sheryl Sandberg now, I believe, is one of the owners or co-owners of the metaverse, aka Facebook, nowadays. Something to that extent. But while we're bringing her story, very interesting in 2017, tragically, she and her husband and their family, they were vacationing. They were at a hotel, and this actually was on the news. Her husband went to the gym in the hotel, and he was running the treadmill. He slipped and fell, and he died. It originally was thought that he died from just the trauma of falling off the treadmill, but it was later, after an autopsy, that he actually had heart disease that caused him to pass out and subsequently fall and then pass away. So in this book called Option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy, is written by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant, who is a psychologist. And it's really interesting because she details in this book that her option A was, the life she had chosen with her husband and her children, and that they were going to live together until they died of old age. But here she was faced with this sudden loss, huge loss in her life, her dearly beloved husband, and leaving her alone, so to speak, and she didn't know what to do. And she decided to turn a situation that otherwise could have broken down anyone's mind, heart, and soul. But she chose to utilize that and be resilient and find joy. And there's a quote from her that's really beautiful. And she says that, "I think when tragedy occurs, it presents a choice. You can give into the void, the emptiness that fills your heart, your lungs, constricts your ability to think or even breathe, or you can try to find meaning. It's a choice. We give in to the darkness, or we try to find meaning and purpose." It's a beautiful reminder that it is a choice that we make. We just have to remember that we have that choice, that we are not simply victims of circumstance, that we have the opportunity, we have the ability to change how I'm reacting to a situation. Joanna DeAngelis, who is the spirit guide of the well-known Brazilian spiritist medium, Givaldo Franco, she often says that a lot of our problems is an issue of mental fixation. We get so fixated, and either we get into this, victim mentality, which is not beneficial to us. But it's very complicated because on one hand, we have emotions that are, hard to process, grief. Dr. Kubler-Ross did great research on grief and death and dying and the stages of grief. And, it can take, for all of us, the experience is different, and it can take time. But the bottom line is that one thing we don't realize is that we can take back our own power. And when we think about obedience and resignation, we hear words like submissiveness, and it is. But at the same time, in a paradoxical way, it's us taking our power back and saying, I don't need to be a victim. I don't need to wear black and be depressed because that's what society and everyone expects is going to happen to me. We don't have to be that. We can be something different. We can choose to find meaning, purpose. And much like Sheryl Sandberg, who took this situation and took it as an opportunity to share with others the enlightening life choice of acceptance and resilience and finding joy, how you can still experience joy even though you have experienced something extremely tragic, unexpected. So she took that opportunity. Is it rare? Sure, absolutely. But it's rare because perhaps maybe we lack the courage. And we just need to be reminded that we have that superpower to take back ownership of our lives, to make our life what we want it to be. And we're not talking about changing circumstances, because the reality is we don't always have control of the outside. But I do have control of myself, of my emotions, of my feelings, of how I choose to look at life. That is under my control. And Joanna DeAngelis, in the book Times of Health and Conscientiousness, which is a chapter book that she goes into many different challenges that each one of us face in life from varying degrees. And step by step, she gives advice on how to manage life, how to deal with things, how to endure hardships. So it's a separate plug for that book in and of itself. Aside from the gospel, and in the books of the codification, for some of us who may have grown up spiritist or who've been in spiritism for a while, who are not baby spiritists, if you will, like baby Christians, we might get away from the codification. We read a lot of all the adjunct literature, which are good. The books of Andrea Louise, the collection, Givaldo, Chico Xavier, all those books are absolutely fantastic. They are amazing. They are gems. But as we reread the gospel, from week to week we read it, it is such a great reminder to be more proactive, to utilize this gem of a book, to take this, which, by the way, probably about 20 years ago, I'm trying to think my age and counting backwards, we didn't always have these books in English and readily accessible. Excuse my coughing. But what a prize, what a joy, what a thing to be grateful for, that we have access to this literature in the English language. And we even have things like ebooks, which, come on, at our fingertips. These are the things that we can utilize and put in our toolbox, just like that CPR mask. Putting obedience and resignation and reading and feeding our minds, preparing ourselves, not waiting for something to happen before we begin to seek out the gospel, but being proactive. It is one of many other superpowers that we have, that we can change our lives and change whether or not we're happy. Because the bottom line is, Miss Emma or Mademoiselle Emma or Sheryl Sandberg or many other people who experience great loss but choose to handle it in a different way. Stephen Hawking, who for the longest time, if you aren't familiar with who he is, very famous scientist, writer, thinker. He's many things. He was stricken in his 20s with ALS. It's a degenerative disease that has left him wheelchair bound and reliant on others to take care of him. But it's amazing because you would look at his physical body and think, what kind of quality of life is that? But when you see what he has produced in his lifetime since his diagnosis, it's amazing, because he continues to persevere, to find purpose, to find meaning, not only in his own life, but for the betterment of the entire world, for society, helping us to think outside of the box. And we can take him as a perfect example. He could have easily just become depressed, gave up his work, his scientific research, his everything, this great mind, and threw it all away. He could have. And I'm sure he was faced with those moments. But he chose a different way. He chose to go a different way. So we don't have to wait to experience loss or tragedy. We can be proactive today. And from this book, Times of Health and Conscientiousness, there's a small excerpt that we brought on being more proactive, and also how to safeguard ourselves emotionally and internally. Joanna says, read an uplifting passage from the gospel or edifying work in order to renew yourself emotionally. And we brought the science of benefits of reading that enhances brain function, reduces stress levels, prevents cognitive decline, boosts sleep, improves general knowledge, and expands your vocabulary. There's no reason why we shouldn't take the time out to read. Nowadays, there are even technology that read the books for you, and audiobooks as well. It's amazing. Nowadays, don't have much of an excuse. Although we will say some people that used to drive many miles to work and perhaps used to listen to audiobooks, maybe you might say, well, I don't have that opportunity. Well, we still can, listen to audiobooks at night or when we're walking our dog or what have you. But being reminded that reading any type of edifying book renews us emotionally. So whether we are feeling down or not feeling like ourselves, feeling off, or whether we just want to do preventative care, so to speak, on ourselves, reading positive and uplifting literature is super beneficial, and it's a form of medicine. And we should not discount it just as some pretty words that we're reading on the screen or in a book. Joanna also says, get away from the hustle and bustle and get some rest. Contemplate a region that will lift you out of your dismal state. And she actually says in this very book that it's so important for us to imagine and to visualize ourselves in a state of good health, because we have power over the cells in our body. And even in the book Evolution in Two Worlds by Andrea Louise and Chico Xavier, by the medium Chico Xavier, they tell us how much power we have in our minds, that we can talk to ourselves as if they were little animals and love on them and bring healing to them. So every time I sit there and I ruminate on a disease that I've been diagnosed with, or my ailing back, or this or that, or what, we should visualize ourselves in 100% health and imagine healing light to those areas of our body, to bring peace, to bless this physical vehicle that has allowed us to be here. And Joanna says, think about the blissful future that awaits you. Lift yourself to God through fervent prayer, and you will break the chains of affliction. And in the Spirit's book, the Spirits make us a promise that if we pray, if we open our hearts and we pray to God and we ask for assistance, they will give us what we always like to call spiritual CPR. Courage, patience, and resignation. No matter what's going on, no matter where you're at, no matter how rebellious or not you have been or have been experiencing life, it is promised to us that if we pray fervently and ask for help, God will grant that to us in the form of courage, patience, and resignation, first and foremost. That is the greatest, many of the greatest tools that we have at our fingertips, so to speak. That superpower to take back our own power. Because when we think about obedience and resignation, you might think, well, I don't want to be some meek little person that just stands in the corner. That's not what obedience and resignation is. It takes incredible courage, incredible courage from our heart and our soul to resign ourselves to accept what is happening to us and to use our reason and rationale to understand there's certain things we are meant to go through in life, and we may not know why, and we may not get the questions answered in this life. And there has to be an acceptance that we come to with that. And when we come to that acceptance, when we come to resign ourselves and to be obedient before God, that's when the peace washes over us. It's a peace unlike anything else in the world. So why not? Why not choose that and let go of our old ways of doing things, our old habits of wanting to project this image of strength, and I'm going to punch through these walls and hear me roar and rebel. We don't have to be that way. Strength also comes in allowing ourselves to accept what is and the truth about what is and what's in front of us. That is truly a superpower that each one of us possesses. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you for being present here and sharing this moment with me as I try to figure out where the screen went. My screen went blank. Yep, my screen went blank. Let me try to shut down and restart because my screen is blank. Can you see me, Peter?
Yeah, I can see you. You're fine.
Okay. Well, I'm just gonna leave it. I don't.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, okay. I see you. Perfect.
I got it back. Oh, I got it back. Yay!
Yay! All right.
You know, it's funny because in this moment I was like, right. Oh, I'm gonna freak out. I said, nope. I'm gonna accept, resign myself.
This is a perfect example. Yes.
The computer came back.
Let go and let God, as they say.
Let go and let God. Amen to that.
Well, thank you. This has been very, I mean, this stuff is very transformative if we can put it into our lives. Okay, so we have some questions and comments. Saw a few, so let's see what we have here. This is from Paul Jacoby. Hi, Paul. He says or asks, doesn't resignation allow suffering to continue, but opens us to learn wonderful lessons from it?
Doesn't resignation allow suffering to continue? So whenever we are going through a hardship, whether we choose to find acceptance in it or not, we will experience challenging and difficult emotions and thoughts. And some would describe that as suffering. So does resignation allow suffering to continue? I wouldn't put it in those words. As a matter of fact, I would say it doesn't. It minimizes your suffering. So if anything, I would say it mitigates. It's almost as if you were to take a spiritual Tylenol, if you will. That's not even a really good comparison, but it's a way to lessen our suffering. Because in acceptance, when we accept and resign ourselves to what's going on, we're not fighting against the current. And that's what's generally is more painful, when we're constantly fighting against what is. Mm-hmm. But when you let go and accept, it's so freeing that I guarantee, it's not me guaranteeing, this is what we've learned in Spiritism, it lessens the load of suffering because you find peace. Your suffering is replaced with more peace. Are there lessons to be learned? Absolutely. Will you still experience pain? Sure. But when we find acceptance in it, it changes the flavor, if that makes sense. I hope that answers this question.
Yeah, I think that does. I think that captured what he was getting at by allowing suffering. We're at least acknowledging that it's there, but it doesn't mean we have to, that the more we learn how to handle it, the easier certain things can become.
Yes.
Okay, let's see what we have next here. This is from the Spiritist Network. Some people prefer to use the word acceptance instead of resignation because resignation may give the sense of weakness. What is your thought on that?
Yes, and I think I think the word resignation has gotten a really bad rap. It has become the persona non grata in terms of words, because it's like it has a negative connotation to it just throughout history. You know, like the slave resigning itself to its master. And it's not that way. Again, that's why it's so important to have an open mind, to reframe things and look at it differently. And if changing the word is important for us to feel differently, that's okay. Mm-hmm. You know, as Shakespeare said, a rose by, what is it? A rose by any other name, you know, it doesn't matter necessarily what we call it. What matters is the internal, the internal change that happens within us. So if the word acceptance feels better to us, we can use that. Mm-hmm. So there's no harm and no foul in the actual word itself.
Right. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Next question or comment. This is from Yasko Arkava. Hi, Yasko. Hi, dear friend Kirsten. Great topic to analyze in what stage of moral evolution we are. Rebel or rebelliousness versus acceptance may indicate whether we are here to expiate the wrong done or to test if we finally got God's design, using pain, suffering as an evolutionary instrument. Please comment on this.
Yes, thank you so much, Yasko, and for the comment question before the other two as well. So yes, no, definitely. It's somewhere in the Spiritist literature, I want to say in one of Joanna DeAngelis's books, that we can know our level of advancement, and we can also sort of know how far or how much we have to go by how we deal with difficult situations. So there's a phrase or a saying that if we are suffering and are able to not cause suffering to others, we are on a good path. But if we are suffering, and because of our suffering are increasing the suffering of others, we still have a long way to go. So it's just something for us to think about, that the sooner we accept, the sooner we allow ourselves to be open to ask the question, what can I learn from this? The sooner we can get through it, learn from it, evolve, change, and be better.
Right. It's not about eradicating suffering. It's learning how to react to it in healthy way.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that question. This next question is from Joaquim Eletero. How can having dreams about the future help one to accept and obey the will of God?
Our mind is a very powerful tool. And the best way I'm the kind of person that thinks in being practical and hands-on, and, how do I take this knowledge and use it in my everyday? Well, the best way to learn, Joaquim, is to actually practice this, to sit down and decide what certain things you want to, begin to visualize in your life. And you will see, bit by bit, day by day, as you continue to visualize that, how your own mentality, your emotion, how things begin to change for you in your life. Because you begin to open up a space in your mind, in your mental field, for something different. As opposed to us always thinking about the doom and gloom, rehearsing, tragedy in our minds. We project this out into the atmosphere, opening ourselves for, the negative influences around us to affect us in a bad way. And we all have, and it's one thing that I was remiss in not mentioning, we all have spiritual influences, and it's the reality of life. So the more we are able to focus and connect with something that's more positive, we can lift up our vibrations and protect ourselves more. And not only protecting ourselves, but it changes our purview, and it changes the way that we experience life. So the best way to test it is to try it out, I would say also.
Absolutely. Good points. Okay. Let's see what we have here. This is from Glacio Persoa. Hi, Glacio. Question: how can we identify the opportunities that adversity might present to us, similar to what spirits like Stephen Hawking did?
That's a great question. I would say paying attention to what hurts. Pain is an indicator for us where growth is needed, or growth is almost being forced in a sense. So it's painful. So I would ask yourself, where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? And you will you'll be able to identify the opportunities, because it is through that pain and questioning ourselves, where does it hurt? Why am I hurting? Will I begin to find, opportunities and to take that situation and make it better. So everyone, it's such a broad response. I realize that, because everyone's situation is so unique, and it's important that, we don't give blanket statements. It's hard sometimes not to, but it's important for us to ask ourselves, where am I struggling the most in my life? And those are probably the areas that we can identify those where adversity lies, and then go from there and find ways to overcome it. I hope that helps a little bit.
It's fascinating with people like Stephen Hawking, that someone as brilliant as he was, trying to figure out the origins of the universe, that he came into this world at this particular time with that particular illness, and there was technology available to allow him to keep communicating, and that all came together when it did.
Amazing.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what our next question is. This is from, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Priscilla Lista Quantico. Congratulations on your topic. Do we have free will if we have already chosen the trials we will go through before coming to Earth?
Great question. Yeah, free will. So I want to break down this question first in saying that before we reincarnate, we always refer to the reincarnatory plan. And some of us might think that the plan is, okay, I'm going to go to A, then to B, then to C, then to D, and those very specific pinpoints. When in reality, it's more like God analyzes, I would say God, the high spirits, when putting our life plan together, analyzes our strengths and weaknesses, what we need to learn in this lifetime, with the time allotted to us, and what are the statistical analysis of what may or may not happen. So when we think about free will and choosing our trials, it's not so much the trial in and of itself, but the lesson that it provokes. And so, yes, we have free will. We have free will. But what we often forget is free will comes with consequences. And we're dealing with consequences that are echoes from our past, and that it's very likely we don't recall our past lives. So we are currently living out the consequences from our past. So yes, we have free will. And oftentimes we agree beforehand coming to this planet with, what we're going to be enduring. Sometimes we, depending upon our level of evolution, we are privy to that information. We know that we're going to come with a certain ailment or an illness. And we agree to that, or we agree to be born in a family where we know we are the black sheep or what have you. So yes, we go in, but when we are choosing that, we go in with the mentality that on the other side that we want to be better. It's only when we get here when we're like, oh, woe is me. Why did I choose this? Like, what was I thinking? So yes, we absolutely do have free will. It's just more complex than, if we've already chosen the trials. It's kind of like the argument of fate and destiny, which we don't have time to get into now. But you can read in the codification about that as well if you want to learn more about that.
Okay. Yeah, that was those are some good responses to that question. It's a big question to reflect. Okay, I believe we have a little bit more. This is from the International Spiritist Council. What are some of the ways in which rebelliousness perpetuates unhappiness?
Oh, so many. So many. Fighting against the current is extremely painful. If you've ever, I'm trying to think of a physical analogy. So, a fire hydrant. So when I was a child growing up, we had a fire hydrant right in front of our house. And there was just one year this happened. Somebody, I don't know who it was, somebody opened the fire hydrant and the water came like gushing out. So all the kids in the neighborhood, we all, of course, took turns in going in front of the fire hydrant and feeling that huge gush of water, against our backs. And you feel that, and it's kind of painful, but when you're a kid, it's like fun and games and whatnot. But it is painful. You stand there long enough and close enough, you feel that pressure against your back, and it's kind of like that. You're fighting against something that is useless in fighting. And we say useless in a very charitable way, because unless you've gone through a hardship, it might be difficult to visualize this. And I speak from the depth of experience that rebelliousness perpetuates unhappiness on so many levels. When we don't accept what is, we suffer. And then we lower our vibration. Then we lower our immune system, and we're more likely to get ill. And then we lower our spiritual immune system as well. And we allow ourselves to be more open to negative influences from the spirit realm. And then we not only oftentimes are miserable alone, we tend to make others miserable around us, whether unconsciously or consciously. You know, as they say, misery loves company. So I have never found any benefits in being rebellious. But it's important to be authentic, feel how we feel, acknowledge how we feel, but work through it. Oh, thanks for the question.
Good points. Okay, we have time for one more question. From the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Kirsten, do you know if science has found a relationship between positive, authentic behavior and our physical health?
Oh, absolutely. There is the work of Brené Brown. She's a social worker who has her PhD and did a lot of research in being an authenticity, amongst other things. Really recommend her work. You can find it and Google her website. But there is a lot of science behind authenticity and being true to who you are, and having a positive effect on our physical health. So I think there's a whole lot we could say about this, but I know because of time, I don't think I have the time to go into at length. But there definitely, science definitely has found that a relationship between authentic behavior and being happy and having a positive physical reflection in our immune system, at a cellular level. It does affect us in a positive way. We've already found that out.
That's great to know. That's very encouraging. Okay, well, thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, everyone who watched today's live. Thank you for your questions. And thank you those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Next Saturday, we will have Sonia Doi talking about faith and cellular responses. Actually, I think it's connected to what you were just saying, Kirsten, it sounds like. Okay, so before we close this live, Kirsten, can you do a final prayer for us?
Yes, absolutely. As we lift up our hearts and our minds to our divine creator, to our model and guide, Jesus, in thanks and gratitude for our spirit benefactors, for our like-minded friends, for this work. We thank you for the blessing of this opportunity to be together, to share in this rich knowledge, and to feel the love of our Creator closer to our hearts. We also take this opportunity, dear God, to pray for those who are struggling, who are actively going through immense hardships of many different kinds. Dear God, we pray that the Master Jesus, that our guardian angel or spirit guides may assist them and may reach their heart in bringing them solace and courage to endure, and the wisdom to find the lesson. We thank you for the blessing of this life and all that comes with it. We thank you, and so be it.